The idea of doing a Lone Gunmen spinoff had been suggested very early on.
I always thought it was perfectly cast. They all had that kind of great visual take on who they were.
We tell the stories others refuse to tell.
I'm Bruce Harwood. I play Byers.
I'm Dean Haglund. I play Langley.
I'm Tom Braidwood. I play Frohickey.
And we're the Lone Gunmen.
The Forgotten Lone Gunmen 9/11 Prediction. 6 months before terrorists hijacked commercial jet planes and used them as weapons of mass destruction, taking down New York's Twin Towers, killing thousands of people, and changing our lives forever, a similar plot was unveiled in the pilot episode of The Lone Gunmen, an X-Files spin-off.
Oh my God! What do we do? I don't know!
Surprisingly, this amazing coincidence was for the most part ignored and considered just that, a coincidence. Conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories have been with us for a long time. A conspiracy theory is an explanation for an event or situation that invokes a conspiracy by sinister and powerful groups, often political motivation, when other explanations are more probable. The term has a negative connotation, implying that the appeal to a conspiracy is based on prejudice or insufficient evidence. Conspiracy theories, once limited to fringe audiences, have become commonplace in mass media, the internet, and social media, emerging as a cultural phenomenon. The Oxford English Dictionary cites a 1909 article in the American Historical Review as the earliest usage example, although it also appeared in print as early as 1870. The term conspiracy theory is itself the subject of conspiracy theory, which claims the term was popularized by the CIA in order to discredit conspiratorial believers, particularly critics of the Warren Commission, by making them a target of ridicule. As you can see, a survey done by NPR and Ipsos in December 2020 shows how many Americans believe in conspiracy theories. The QAnon Satan-worshipping elites running a child sex ring, 17% said they believe, 37% said they were not sure. That means that 54% of Americans did not rule that out entirely. It's interesting to see that the 9/11 conspiracy theories at the bottom are fairly small. Only 7% believe and 20% are not sure. Now, before the internet, conspiracy theories were very fringe and slower to spread. They could also be just more fun. The movie Capricorn 1 in 1977 envisioned the first manned flight to Mars being deemed unsafe and scrubbed on the launch pad. Anxious authorities must scramble to save face and retain their funding, and so an unthinkable plot to fake the mission is hatched. Basically, the whole thing was done in a studio. Peter Hyams began thinking about a film of a space hoax while working on broadcasts of the Apollo missions for CBS. He later reflected regarding the Apollo 11 moon landing that there was one event of really enormous importance that had almost no witnesses, and the only verification we have came from a TV camera. He later elaborated, whenever there was something on the news about a space shuttle, they would cut to a studio in St. Louis where there was a simulation of what was going on. I grew up in the generation where my parents basically believed if it was in the newspaper, it was true. That turned out to be BS. My generation was brought up to believe television was true, and that was BS too. So I was watching these simulations and I wondered what would happen if someone faked the whole story. The script was written in 1972, and interest in the script was actually fueled by the Watergate scandal. The thing was, you could have a discussion with your neighbor over a backyard barbecue, and while you would both agree that it was just fiction, it was interesting and people needed to be vigilant against possible hoaxes. You didn't have to get in an anonymous fight over the internet with one calling the other a sheep and the other being called a tinfoil hat-wearing nutbar. We don't even need to discuss the Area 51 Roswell incident and UFOs in general to see people had various views, but they didn't feel the need to threaten each other over the differences.
What's the matter, Byers?
The matter is we don't have the proof. Without proof, we're nothing more than conspiracy mongers. Without proof, all we can do is cry wolf.
The X-Files, I Want to Believe. In 1993, the fledgling fourth U.S. television network, Fox, unveiled a new show from creator Chris Carter. X-Files was added to the 1993 fall lineup, and a cultural phenomenon was born. The series, of course, was based on two FBI agents, Fox Mulder and Dana Scully, who investigate unsolved cases involving paranormal phenomena. But you know all this so forgive me. X-Files combined the best of episodic suspense, similar to shows like Twilight Zone and Night Gallery, but with serial and ongoing storylines and characters. Chris Carter had formerly been working on comedies for Disney Pictures, so Fox lured him over to work on other material closer to his heart. Carter drew inspiration from Silence of the Lambs, which set the show with FBI agents. The Avengers contributed the idea of Mulder and Scully having a platonic relationship, and Twin Peaks contributed to the dark atmosphere of the show. Throw into that mix the Watergate scandal and All the President's Men, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Oliver Stone's JFK, and you have the elements of the mood. The X-Files pilot drew 12 million viewers, and ratings increased to the season finale of 14 million. Keep those numbers in mind when we discuss the Lone Gunmen. That season ranked 105th of 128 primetime shows, but keep in mind that all of Fox's shows were pretty low at this time due to their weak affiliates. It was also a good ratings draw for the key demo of 18 to 49. Season 4 saw the show really start to take off as it finished the 12th highest ranked show in prime time. Seasons 4 to 6 were strong, but then the show tailed off for seasons 7 to 9. As you might remember, after season 7, David Duchovny only appeared as Fox Mulder in a few episodes, in essence replaced by Agent Doggett, played by Robert Patrick. But I digress. X-Files, which at one time was Fox's top-watched program, managed to get itself 2 motion picture releases in theaters, toys, comics, etc., and later a 2-season revival. But what it failed to do was get a successful spin-off. They did try, though, with the Lone Gunmen.
We tell the stories others refuse to tell.
In March of 2001, the first and only X-Files spin-off attempt, called The Lone Gunmen, was launched as a spring show. The show revolved around 3 investigators, Frolicki, Byers, and Langley, who ran a conspiracy theory magazine called The Lone Gunmen. Yes, this was before wide use of the internet, so a paper-based magazine it was indeed. In the pilot episode, Byers mentions their last issue had a distribution of less than 3,000 copies.
The readership doesn't matter, man. It's the impact on the black ops that counts. They read it too. The guys at the NSA and the CIA, they tremble every time we put out one of these babies.
They were speaking to the converted, not changing minds. While the X-Files dealt with paranormal and extraterrestrial events, the Lone Gunmen dealt with secret activity by the government and all kinds of cover-ups and agendas. The show was overall more lighthearted than X-Files, more old-fashioned and episodic. However, it was just simpler and maybe more realistic, which probably actually hurt its ability to hang on to X-File audiences. On March 4, 2001, the pilot episode of Lone Gunmen premiered on Fox and drew 13 million viewers. That was higher than X-Files premiere, but much lower than X-Files' current viewership. Ratings of Gunmen, though, plummeted from there, losing 5 million viewers, down to 8 million for episode 2, then down to 5.4 million for episode 3. While there was some bounce-back weeks, in general the show did 3 to 5 million viewers after that. It finished the season at an average of 5.3 million viewers and was ranked number 111 in primetime. The show had received some surprisingly good reviews, but it was cancelled after just 13 episodes. The first 2 episodes of Lone Gunmen aired during X-Files' regular Sunday night time slot. The 2 X-Files episodes prior to the Lone Gunmen premiere drew over 16 million viewers. Gunmen's 2 episodes in the same time slot drew 13 million and then 8 million. After that, Lone Gunmen moved to Friday for episode 3, drawing 5 million, and then aired episode 4 again on Sunday, bouncing back to 8 million viewers. The rest of the episodes aired on Fridays, drawing between 5 and 6 million viewers. Interestingly enough, Gunmen's Friday time slot came as a replacement for another scripted paranormal show, Freaky Links. Freaky Links was an American science fiction series that combined elements of horror, mystery, and comedy. It aired on Fox from October 2000 until June 2001 for a total run of 13 episodes. The feel of the show closely modeled that of The X-Files and other supernatural-themed shows that were popular at the time. Freaky Links drew between 7 and 8 million viewers per episode and was cancelled after 13 episodes. Competition in that time slot included the surprise return of game shows like ABC's Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which drew around 11 million viewers, and Dateline on NBC. It's hard to understand what Fox wanted or expected from its shows, considering they canceled both Freaky Links and Lone Gunmen. The next season, Fox used that time slot for a soap opera, Pasadena, repeats of 24, Jessica Alba's Dark Angel, and then X-File repeats. Friday nights were turning into ratings wasteland across the network TV stratosphere at this time. Vince Gilligan, the co-creator of the show, said, "I have such fondness for the Lone Gunmen. I think it ended way too soon. I was crushed when the Lone Gunmen got cancelled after its first season. The Lone Gunmen to this day is a show I'm still proud of and I will always be proud of. It sort of points to an interesting phenomenon about television. You can't really tell in advance whether a show is going to work for an audience. I would hold the Lone Gunmen up against anything that I have done before or since. For some reason, timing, I guess, being the best thing to point to, it just didn't click with an audience. If the Lone Gunmen had come on maybe a couple of years earlier or a couple of years later, maybe it would have clicked." The three main characters of Lone Gunmen had been recurring characters in the X-Files, first appearing in Season 1's episode EBE. Unlike the very competent and sexy lead characters of X-Files, the Lone Gunmen were best described as well-intentioned, nerdy and bright, but also clumsy and sometimes inept. In essence, they were more like Three Stooges than leading men. Unlikely heroes indeed. A fit, book-dumb but charismatic character, Jimmy Bond, along with a very competent and sexy female cohort, Eves, were added to try and rectify this problem. However, the episodes more closely resembled Get Smart or Three's Company than it did X-Files. The trio had been recurring characters on X-Files since Season 1. In fact, originally in Season 4 episode called Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man, Frohike was written to die. However, after some lobbying by some of the writers and producers, it was decided not to kill him. Then in Season 5, Duchovny and Anderson were still filming the X-File movie, so Vince Gilligan came up with the idea to do a Lone Gunmen episode, Unusual Suspects, which drew over 21 million viewers, right in line with the season averages. This was followed in Season 6, this time very late in the season, with another Lone Gunmen-centric episode called Three of a Kind. Ratings for that episode were around 13 million, which was 2 to 3 million below the previous two episodes and the subsequent two episodes. Despite that small bump, the show seemed to go over well, and so Spotsnick and Gilligan led the crusade to convince Chris Carter to do a Lone Gunmen spin-off. The pilot. So back to the pilot. It aired 6 months prior to the September 11, 2001 attacks, and oddly enough, the plot was that the rogue members of the U.S. government had remotely hijacked an airliner and planned to crash it into the World Trade Center with the belief that anti-American terrorist groups and countries would take credit, thus creating a war and therefore increasing the demand for weapons. The plan itself used a more sophisticated and easier to cover up method of electronic incursion to use the plane as a remote control weapon instead of what actually happened in 9/11 of terrorists taking control from inside the plane. So in essence, the target of the attack as well as the use of a commercial jet plane were the same as to what ended up transpiring. The method of hijacking was different. Of course, where the real conspiracy comes into play is that on the show, the plan was for the bad actors to step forward and be stupid enough to take credit. Presumably, if this did not happen, the same faction of government could probably fabricate something to make targets to blame, perhaps like finding weapons of mass destruction. In the real world, the terrorist group Al-Qaeda did take responsibility and the hunt and war was on. The problem is that in today's day and age, this simple explanation was not enough for some people who began to create conspiracy theories that certain U.S. agencies conspired to make these events happen for the exact reason that was outlined in The Lone Gunmen. Now, if this had happened in a show like JAG, NYPD Blue, or The West Wing, it would have got more exposure, but then again, probably wouldn't raise as many eyebrows as when it happened on a show that was actually about government conspiracies and cover-ups. However, while it was pointed out by a couple of media players, the plot coincidence never really became a big story. You really have to think that due to the gravity of the situation, that people just realized how absurd that connection would be, and no one wanted to stick their necks out on an outlandish theory that they were actually connected. At a February 2008 fan event, a fan asked about the X-Files and 9/11 controversy. Carter passed the question to Frank Spotsnick, an executive director of the Lone Gunmen, who said, "We were really upset and worried that somehow we had inspired the plot, but we were relieved to discover that the plot predated the Lone Gunmen and that 9/11 had nothing to do with our work. And then once we realized that, my next thought was how the government hadn't known about this plot. There have been a lot of conspiracy theories about the connection between 9/11 and the Lone Gunmen, but none of them are true. Frank Spotsnick also later said, "I woke up on September 11th and saw it on TV, and the first thing I thought of was the Lone Gunmen. But then in the weeks and months that followed, almost no one noticed the connection. What's disturbing about it to me is you think as a fiction writer that if you can imagine this scenario, then the people in power in the government who are there to imagine disaster scenarios can imagine it too. And of course, the conspiracy theorists would probably tell you that they did imagine the disaster. In fact, maybe they did more than imagine it."
When we started, it was like a day player
We were
thing.
day players, and what did we get? 9 years and a spin-off.
We're the luckiest day players around.
The luckiest day players around. After the last episode of The Lone Gunmen aired on June 1st, 2001, there was a serious lack of closure. As fate would have it, that fall, X-Files began its season 9, which was supposed to be the final season. Because the characters were so liked by the fans and creators of the show, a final send-off was arranged. They wanted to send the gunmen off as heroes to let them make the final sacrifice and fulfill an awesome destiny. So after briefly appearing in 4 earlier episodes of the season, the big send-off occurred on episode 915 entitled Jump the Shark. The network Fox was not too keen on having the characters from a cancelled show appear on the X-Files, but by this time I'm sure Carter and Gilligan were calling the shots as they were on their way out. The Lone Gunmen, with the aid of Morris Fletcher, played by Michael McKean, aka Chuck from Better Call Saul, must stop a destructive virus from entering the populace. Well, they accomplished that, but it was done at the price of sacrificing themselves, while being watched by distressed Eves Harlow and a stoic Jimmy Bond. Also, for wrestling fans, Pamela Paulshock had a role in this episode. But of course, no death on TV is final, right? Bobby Ewing, anyone? When the X-Files was relaunched for season 10 in 2016, viewers were ripe for nostalgia and networks were begging for ratings. Explaining the end of the X-Files series and then its rebirth, Carter said, "There was lots more we could have done, but we ended it at the right time. Things had changed after 9/11, and now the mood is right once more." So in the 5th episode entitled Babylon, the trio appear in Mulder's hallucinations. Carter had said that he would not follow the X-Files comic book saga, where the Lone Gunmen were alive having faked their own deaths. Then in the next and final, so far that is, season 11, episode 2 entitled This, Langley reaches out to Mulder and Scully from the grave, well, via hacking Mulder's phone with his virtual ghost. I'm sorry in advance to all the nerds out there if I don't have that exact terminology right. We are left to think that Langley or his consciousness, or some BS, is still trapped in a virtual prison. My take. I have to admit I was not an X-Files watcher back in the day. Most of my friends were, but for whatever reason I just never got into the show. In fact, I had never watched an episode until they announced that it was coming back in 2016, and the Sci-Fi Channel ran a mini marathon of the best episodes of the prior seasons. I watched a few of those and I was hooked. It was so much better than the crap that was usually on TV now, so I binged it on Netflix in time to be caught up for season 10, which was quite a feat. Last year I came across the Lone Gunmen episodes posted on YouTube and watched them all. I will post links to some sources in the description. They were a contrast to X-Files, and if watched simultaneously, if they'd been around when X-Files was at its peak, the series may have succeeded as the not-so-dark and serious sister show. The Friday night time slot didn't help the show either. However, when looking for another dose of the X-Files, Lone Gunmen delivered something different. I found the shows to be a throwback to the serialization that was more common back in the 80s, with about the same level of plot depth. I enjoyed watching the episodes, but can understand why the show didn't succeed, especially since X-Files was already on the decline. I don't really share Carter's feelings about the world changing. Yes, it changed, but the problem to me wasn't the subject matter of the show, but rather the lack of sophistication. Now, if you want a great show that tanked much more directly because of a worldwide event, I would look at Murder One and the impact of the O.J. Simpson verdict. As for the 9/11 conspiracy theories, I guess I'm a little surprised that the show didn't get more attention for basically predicting a scenario that then changed the world. But I'm not surprised by the lack of attention it gets from a conspiracy point of view, as it shows the gravitas of the 9/11 terror attack compared to the lack of seriousness with which Lone Gunmen was presented. In the end, the show was too little depth, too late in the X-Files evolution, and maybe just a vanity project by the people behind X-Files to allow them to produce a different type of show. Thanks for watching.